It is time to discuss risk rules because risk is the only thing you control. So if you go to my website, microstrader.com, and click this little hamburger menu and click risk rules, you'll come straight to this page. On this page, I have been going over each of the risk rules. So for example, if you come here to risk rule 1 and click video explanation, there's the link to the video. If you wanted to read the transcript, that's available too. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the first 3 risk rules, and then we're going to talk about the 4th risk rule that we haven't discussed yet in depth. So let's talk about risk rules. So number 1, so important, know when not to trade. Now we cover this in detail in the Core Strategy Academy, and I pound it into my traders' heads every day on Zoom. Knowing when not to trade is one of the first things I want you to learn. If we can remove all of the bad times to trade, then we are eliminating some risky trades from your bucket of trades, okay? So knowing when not to trade will be extremely helpful to your P&L. Risk rule 2. And this is the king of all rules. You can even violate this first rule and trade when you want to.
What?
But you never ever want to violate risk rule number 2. This is the king of all rules. Know exactly how much you're willing to risk on every trade and your max loss per day. Absolutely key. So on every trade and per day. All right. I would give the per day even greater importance than the per trade. You can screw up this per trade, but never mess up the per day. The per day, if this was chess pieces, this is the king. Per day is the king. Per trade would be the queen. It's two very powerful, because if you lose the king, the game is over.
For the king!
So, very important. You do not violate those. You can mess up a lot of other rules, but this one you don't mess up. Rule number 2. Rule 3, never add to a loser. Just don't add to a loser. Don't add to a loser. Don't add to a loser. So let's talk about something for a second here. Let's put together a couple things here. Let's bring in risk rule 2, which is really my leverage metrics. I strongly encourage you to click this link and watch that video and download that spreadsheet. It'll help you figure out your max loss per trade and your max loss per day. But never add to a loser. Here's why that's really important.
Okay, here we go.
You have decided you are willing to max lose $60 per trade. And you are willing to do 1 MES, and you've decided that's 12 points of a stop loss. Now, for our system, that's really golden, because I know in 98% of our trades, it'll never go 12 points against you without the ability to get out at break even at least, because we trade with multiple backup levels. Our whole system's just designed to keep you safe. So let's say you entered with 1 MES and you were going to use the 12-point stop loss. That is a really comfortable place to be in our system. But you decide to add a second contract. Well, you no longer can use a 12-point stop loss in this trade because now I have 2 contracts. Your stop loss now has to come in closer, so the trade has less room to work in your favor. That's one reason you don't want to add to a losing trade. I would rather you stay at the 1 MES, keep the 12 points, give the trade as much room as possible to sort itself out. Maybe this is just going to be a bigger wick type of candle, and then it comes back into your favor. But if you add a contract, and you are going to stick with the rule of maximum loss per trade, you have to bring your stop loss closer. Now you've given the trade less room to work because you added more leverage. That just doesn't make sense to me. Now, if you have purposely planned, hey, I'm going to enter this with 3 contracts and I'm going to spread them out, well, that's a different story. But at the end of the day, you are still honoring your max loss per trade. And that's okay. Maybe your max loss per trade instead of 60 is $180. And you decide I'm going to enter with 3 MESs and I'm going to give it basically 12 points of room. And I'm going to spread out my entries. No problem. Just honor your maximum risk per trade.
Sir, yes, sir.
Never violate your max loss per day.
Nope.
Okay? So the next risk rule is absolutely critical because this risk rule 4 leads to blowing what you're willing to do per trade and what you're willing to do per day. It will destroy more accounts than nearly anything else in the world. And that is risk rule 4. Never move your stop, thus incurring a larger loss. Stick to your initial plan. It is okay to be wrong, just don't stay wrong. Just do it. A small loss is easy to make back. A small loss also manages your stress levels. It stops you from going tilt. The best way to protect yourself against your angry self is to limit the size of the loss. And if you move your stop loss further away to incur a larger loss, you've already broke this rule, most likely.
No!
That is allowing yourself to take a larger loss on that trade than you're supposed to, which then opens the door that you blow your max loss per day. I promise you, if you have used the leverage metrics and you stick to the max loss per trade and the max loss per day, you are not going to blow your accounts. So trade goes against you. What's the first thing you should think? Do not make things worse. Do not make things worse. How do you make things worse? Add to a loser and move your stop loss. That's how you make things worse. How do you make things worse? You add to a loser and you move your stop loss. So I added more leverage, and instead of adding leverage and pulling my stop loss in, I'm adding leverage and moving my stop loss, thereby compounding my mistakes, blowing through my max loss per trade, and possibly, most likely, going to blow through your max loss per day account blown. Stay green, my friends, and to learn more about our group, go to microstrader.com.